The morning I turned 67, my phone stayed silent, like it had forgotten I existed. My daughter-in-law posted photos of a luxury yacht brunch that same day, smiling with people I had never even met. No call, no message, not even a happy birthday, just silence where family used to be. And 3 days later, she texted me a number that made my hands go cold. $4,500 for her small yacht party in Miami. I remember staring at that message thinking, how does someone skip your birthday and then ask you to fund their celebration like nothing happened? I didn't cry. I just knew something between us had quietly broken in a way that could never be repaired again. And before I continue, if this story speaks to your heart, take a second to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It truly helps these stories reach more people who need them, and I'd love to know where you're watching from today, your city, your country, and what time it is right now in your part of the world. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 67 years old, and I live in Naples, Florida. And what I'm about to tell you happened the week everything in my family changed forever. It started on a Sunday morning when I baked a small vanilla cake for myself. Nothing fancy, just something sweet to mark another year of my life. I set 2 extra plates on the table out of habit. One for my son David, one for my daughter-in-law Brittany, even though I already knew they weren't coming. I kept checking my phone like an old reflex I couldn't break. At 10:14 a.m., David finally texted me. Sorry, Mom, we got tied up. Brittany planned something small with her friends. We'll make it up to you. I remember reading that sentence twice because it didn't feel real, like I was missing something obvious everyone else understood. I called him anyway. When he answered, I could hear laughter in the background, music, glasses clinking. David, I said quietly, it's my birthday. There was a pause, then his voice lowered like he was stepping away from the noise. I know, Mom, but Brittany already made reservations, and it's kind of last minute to change anything. Brittany's voice came through faintly in the background saying, just tell her we'll do dinner another time. Another time. I looked at my birthday cake sitting untouched on the counter and said, of course, don't let me interrupt your plans. I hung up before I could hear anything else. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table in Naples while the Gulf breeze moved through the open window, and I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. 2 days later, my phone lit up again, Brittany's name on the screen. I expected a late apology, maybe a polite follow-up. Instead, she wrote, we're organizing a yacht party in Miami this weekend. Everyone's pitching in $4,500. Send your part today so we can confirm the booking. I stared at those words for a long time, hearing the quiet hum of my refrigerator in the background, realizing she wasn't asking me. She was assigning me a role in a life I wasn't even invited to. I finally typed back, I'll take care of it. And I pressed send, not because I agreed, but because something in me had already started changing in a way they didn't understand yet. The next moment, I opened my banking app, my fingers steady, my breathing calm. And that's when I saw something I had never expected would matter this much. Something buried in my own accounts that David and Brittany had completely forgotten about. Something that made me put the phone down slowly and whisper to myself, they have no idea what they just assumed. And that was when I realized I had been silent for far too long. And silence, I was about to learn, has a cost they were not ready to pay. After I sent that message, I just sat there staring at my phone screen longer than I should have, waiting for something that never came. No reply, no follow-up, just silence settling in like it had always belonged there. The strange part was not the silence itself, it was how familiar it felt, like I had been practicing it my entire life without realizing it. I set the phone face down on the kitchen table and looked at my reflection in the dark window beside me, an older woman with steady eyes who suddenly felt like she was remembering things she had spent years trying not to feel. When I was a child growing up outside Richmond, Virginia, silence was not peace, it was structure. My father, Robert Collins, believed love was something you earned by being useful, and my brother Michael always seemed to earn it faster than I did. I still remember one Sunday afternoon when I was about 12 years old, standing in our small kitchen, holding 2 plates of baked chicken, waiting to be told where to put them. My mother glanced at me and said, Margaret, just sit down. Michael already served his. I remember looking at my brother across the table, his plate already full, while mine was still in my hands like I had done something wrong just by not being quicker. Later that night, I asked my father, "Why does Michael always get to eat first?" He did not even look up from his newspaper when he answered, "Because he takes responsibility seriously. You will understand when you grow up." I did not understand then, but I learned quickly what that meant in our house. Michael got the attention, the approval, the small nods of pride that felt like sunlight, while I learned to wait quietly for whatever was left. Even my birthdays were different. I remember turning 14 and hearing laughter from the living room because Michael had brought home a school award that same day. My mother said, "We will celebrate both of you next weekend." But next weekend always seemed to forget me. One year, I asked if I could have a small dinner with just my parents, and my father said, "Do not be dramatic, Margaret. The family has already made plans." I stopped asking after that. I learned to smile at the right moments, to clean up without being told, to make myself small enough not to interrupt the flow of other people's lives. I thought I had escaped all of that when I married my husband, Thomas Collins, who used to tell me that I was the only person who ever made his house feel like a home. For a long time, I believed that meant I finally mattered. When David was born, I promised myself I would never make him feel like I once felt. Never let him wonder where he stood in a room full of people. I gave him everything I could: time, attention, stability, even when it meant putting myself last. When he brought Brittany into our lives years later, I noticed small changes first. The way conversations shifted when she entered a room, the way David started explaining things instead of just sharing them. I told myself it was normal, just adjustment, just marriage. One evening, I was folding laundry when Brittany looked around my kitchen and said casually, "This house has a lot of old energy. Maybe it is time for some updates." David laughed softly like it was a joke I was supposed to enjoy. I remember holding a towel in my hands and saying, "This house was built by your grandfather's hands." Brittany smiled without looking at me and said, "That is sweet, but things change." David did not correct her. He just said, "Mom, she means well." That was the first time I noticed the feeling returning. Not anger exactly, but a quiet recognition of being gently repositioned in my own life. Over time, I stopped being asked before decisions were made. Dinner plans, holidays, even small things like rearranging furniture started happening around me instead of with me. I adapted the way I always had, because that is what I learned growing up, that peace is often just another word for quiet acceptance. Sitting alone in my Naples kitchen now, I realized something I had not allowed myself to admit before. This was not new. It was familiar. The only difference was that I was finally old enough to recognize the pattern for what it was. My phone lit up again, breaking the silence. And this time, it was not a message. It was a notification about the yacht payment request still pending, waiting as if I were simply another piece of the plan. I stared at it, my finger hovering above the screen. And for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel like responding the way they expected. And somewhere deep inside that quiet moment, something in me began to shift in a way that would change everything that came next. The next morning in Naples, the sunlight came through the kitchen window in a way that made everything look softer than it felt inside me. I made coffee the same way I always did. 2 teaspoons of ground roast. No sugar, no cream, just habit. But something was different. Not outside, not in the house, but in me. Like a door I had left half open for years, had finally clicked closer without warning. My phone buzzed again on the counter, and this time it was David. I almost answered immediately, like I always used to, but my hand stopped halfway through the motion. I let it ring once, then twice. Then I picked it up calmly and said, "Good morning, David." His voice sounded rushed, almost careful. "Mom," Brittany said, "the payment is still pending. Is everything okay?" I looked at the coffee in my hand and said, "Everything is exactly as it should be." There was a pause, a small, uncomfortable silence that I was not used to hearing from him. "What does that mean?" he asked. I did not explain. I simply said, "Tell Brittany, I will handle it." Then I ended the call before he could ask anything else. It was the first time in years I had ended a conversation first. I stood there for a moment, realizing that small detail mattered more than I wanted to admit. Later that morning, I went to Naples Bay Financial. the same branch I had used for over 20 years. The woman at the counter, Denise, greeted me warmly. "Good to see you, Mrs. Collins. Long time since you came in person." I smiled politely and said, "I need to review all authorized users on my accounts." Her expression shifted slightly as she pulled up the file. Of course, as she turned the screen toward me, I saw it clearly. Joint access permissions, secondary card usage, automatic transfer privileges. Brittany's name was there, not as an owner, but as someone who had slowly been given access over time, convenience after convenience, never questioned. I heard my own voice from years ago in my head saying, "It is just easier this way." Denise asked softly, "Would you like to make any changes today?" I hesitated, not because I was unsure, but because I was realizing how long I had been operating on autopilot for someone else's comfort. "Yes," I said finally. "Remove all secondary access." My voice did not shake, not even once. When I left the bank, the air outside felt different, heavier in a way that was not unpleasant, just real. I drove back home slowly, past palm trees and quiet streets. And for the first time, I did not feel like I was returning to a place where I needed to prepare for anyone's expectations. Around noon, my phone lit up again. Brittany this time. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Her voice came through sharp, controlled, but already cracking at the edges. "Did you cancel something on the account?" I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the water from my porch. "I adjusted permissions," I said calmly. "That is not what I asked," she replied quickly. "The payment did not go through. The yacht deposit is at risk." I could hear her trying to stay composed, but there was something new in her tone, something unsettled. David came on the line in the background. "Mom, just fix it, please. It is causing problems." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, not out of frustration, but clarity. For years, I would have fixed it immediately. I would have explained, softened, reassured. Instead, I said quietly, "If something falls apart because I do not fund it, then it was never stable to begin with." The silence that followed was different from all the others before it. It was no longer comfortable for them. It was unfamiliar. Brittany finally spoke again, slower this time. "You are acting strange lately." I almost smiled at that. "No," I said. "I am just no longer acting automatically." And then I ended the call. My hand stayed on the phone for a few seconds afterward, not trembling, just steady. Somewhere deep in my house, the old grandfather clock chimed, marking time in a way I had not noticed in years. I realized then that something irreversible had already begun, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a tide pulling back from the shore, and what it would reveal next was something neither of them had prepared for at all. That evening, Naples had already settled into its usual quiet rhythm, the kind of stillness that used to make me feel safe, but now felt different, like something unseen was moving just beneath the surface. I was sitting in the living room with a book open on my lap, though I had not turned a page in almost 20 minutes, when my phone started buzzing repeatedly on the table. David. Then Brittany. Then David again. I did not answer immediately. I watched the screen light up over and over until finally I picked it up and said calmly, "What is going on?" David's voice came in fast, almost panicked. "Mom, did you contact the bank again? Brittany just got a call saying access was changed and the deposit is in limbo." I stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "They are not in limbo. They are exactly where I put them." There was a pause. Then Brittany's voice came on, sharper now, forced but unstable. "This is ridiculous. We already told the coordinator everything is confirmed." "You are making us look unprofessional." I looked toward the window where the ocean was darkening under the evening sky and said, "If a single account change makes you look unprofessional, then maybe the arrangement was never as stable as you thought." That was when I heard something new in her tone, not anger, but urgency trying to disguise itself as control. "We already told everyone you were contributing," she said quickly. "The guests, the planner, David's colleagues. You agreed." I froze slightly at the word agreed, because I realized in that moment something had been decided about me, without me ever being part of the decision. David tried to soften it. "Mom, It was just assumed you would help like before. It is no big deal. I stood up slowly and walked into the kitchen, placing the book down on the counter. Assumed, I repeated quietly. The word felt heavier than it should have. Brittany jumped in immediately, her voice now carefully rehearsed. We already sent the confirmation email. Your name is listed as partial sponsor. It is too late to change it now without complications. I felt something tighten in my chest, not pain, but recognition. You listed me, I said slowly, without asking me. Silence followed, not the kind that waits for explanation, but the kind that knows it has been caught. David tried again, weaker now. Mom, it is just wording. Nobody is going to think too much about it. But I could hear it already forming in my mind, the expectation, the assumption, the story being told about me without my voice in it. I opened my laptop with steady hands and checked the email system linked to my financial notifications. There it was, a forwarded copy of a confirmation message sent earlier that day, referencing my contribution as already secured, my approval implied, my role defined without consent. Brittany had not just asked, she had already told others I had agreed. I leaned back slowly in my chair, feeling the air in the room change in a way that was almost physical. When I spoke again, my voice was calm, but it carried something they were not used to hearing. I want you to listen carefully, I said. You do not speak for me. Not to planners, not to guests, not to anyone. Brittany let out a short laugh. But it sounded forced now. You are overreacting. It is just logistics. I closed the laptop gently. Then you will fix your logistics without me. The line went silent for a moment. Then David said quietly, Mom, please do not do this right now. But I already knew it was too late for that sentence. I looked at the pending transactions still sitting on my account dashboard, waiting like a decision someone else thought I had already made. And I felt something inside me settle into place. Not anger, not sadness, just final clarity. I did not agree to any of this, I said softly. And then, right there in the silence that followed, I saw the notification appear. The system attempting one more time to authorize a charge that no longer had permission to exist, and that was the exact moment everything they had built on assumption began to fall apart. The first sign that something had changed was not a phone call or a message, but silence that lasted longer than it should have. After the last conversation ended, I expected the usual storm of follow-up attempts, explanations, maybe even frustration turning into persuasion. Instead, there was nothing. My phone stayed still on the kitchen table, the screen dark, as if the entire world had paused to recalibrate its expectations of me. Then, at exactly 7:42 p.m., the first email arrived. Subject line, urgent clarification required. It was from Brittany. The message was carefully written, too carefully, like someone trying to hold a collapsing structure together with language alone. There seems to be a misunderstanding regarding funding confirmation for the yacht event. We have already communicated expectations to the coordinator and guests. Please respond immediately so we can resolve this professionally. I read it once, then a second time, not because I was confused, but because I was noticing something new beneath the words, urgency replacing assumption. I did not reply. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. David. I let it ring until it stopped. Then again. At 7:55 p.m., a text came through from him. Mom, please just pick up. This is getting out of control. I placed the phone face down and walked to the kitchen sink, turning on the water just to hear something steady. When I came back, there were 3 voicemails waiting. I played the first one. David's voice was strained, careful, like he was walking through broken glass with every word. Mom, Brittany is saying the planner is threatening to cancel. People are asking questions. We just need you to confirm what is going on. I deleted it without finishing. The second voicemail was Brittany, no longer careful. This is not normal behavior. You cannot just agree and disappear. You are putting us in an impossible situation. The third was David again, quieter this time. Please, Mom, just talk to us. I set the phone down and looked around my house. The silence inside it no longer felt like comfort. It felt like distance expanding in real time. Later that night, I checked my email again. 5 new messages. Then 7. Then, a forwarded chain from the event coordinator asking for clarification on payment status, followed by a polite but firm notice that without confirmation, the reservation would be released to other clients. I noticed something else too. A message sent from Brittany to multiple recipients, including family friends, stating that Margaret had generously agreed to contribute and was currently finalizing transfer details. I stared at that sentence longer than anything else. It was not just expectation anymore. It was narrative. I opened my contacts and saw missed calls stacking silently in red. 12 from David. 6 from Brittany. 2 from an unknown number that I assumed was the coordinator. I did not return any of them. Around 10:30 p.m., there was a knock on my door. Not loud, but uncertain. I stood in the hallway for a moment before opening it. David was there, standing slightly hunched, holding his phone in one hand like it weighed too much. His face looked tired in a way I had not seen before. "Mom," he said softly, "they are calling everyone. Brittany is panicking. She says the event might collapse." I looked at him without stepping aside. "And what exactly are you expecting me to do?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Just confirm it. Just tell them it is okay." From behind him, I could see Brittany in the car, not getting out, just watching. Even from a distance, I could feel her presence like pressure in the air. David lowered his voice. "She told people you already agreed. Now they are asking questions. We just need consistency." That word stayed in the air longer than anything else. Consistency. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I finally understood how far this had gone without me. "You told people I agreed," I said quietly. David looked down. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. That silence was enough. I stepped back and closed the door without another word. For a moment, I stood there listening to nothing on the other side. No footsteps, no argument, just the absence of resolution. When I returned to the kitchen, my phone lit up again. Another email. Then another. Then a message from Brittany that simply read, "Please fix this." I sat down at the table and did not move for a long time. Not because I was deciding what to do, but because I was realizing something far more permanent had already happened without my permission. I was no longer part of their conversation. I was only part of their problem. And as the night stretched on, and the messages stopped coming one by one, what remained was not chaos, not anger, but a complete and unfamiliar isolation, the kind that does not ask for response anymore because it no longer expects one. The next morning did not feel like morning at all. It felt like the house had forgotten how to wake up. I sat at the kitchen table in Naples with a cold cup of coffee in front of me, watching the light move slowly across the floor without touching me. My phone had stopped ringing sometime during the night. Not because the problem was solved, but because it had reached a point where repetition no longer changed anything. At 8:13 a.m., there was one last voicemail from David. I pressed play without expecting anything new. His voice was lower now, exhausted in a way that made him sound older than he was. "Mom, Brittany is saying the coordinator pulled the offer. They are asking for proof of payment or they are canceling everything. People are starting to leave the group chat." There was a pause, then softer, almost uncertain. "I think this is really falling apart." I set the phone down and listened to the silence after it ended. It was not dramatic. It was just empty. A few minutes later, I received a message from an unknown number. The event coordinator. "Mrs. Collins, we regret to inform you that without confirmed authorization, your reservation will be released within the next 2 hours. Please advise." I read it once, then again, and for the first time I did not feel pulled into it. I did not feel responsible for fixing it. I simply felt removed from it, like I was reading about someone else's life collapsing at a distance. I stood up and walked to the window. The Gulf of Mexico was calm that morning, almost indifferent. That was when my phone rang again. "Brittany." I answered this time, not because I was ready to fix anything, but because I needed to hear what desperation sounded like when it had nowhere left to go. Her voice came through immediately. No greeting, no warmth. "This is beyond ridiculous. The coordinator says everything is on hold because of you." I remained quiet. she continued, faster now. Do you understand how many people are involved in this? We already told everyone you were handling it. That sentence again, not a request, a story already told. I finally spoke. You keep saying I was handling it, I said softly, but I do not remember agreeing to be responsible for something I was never asked about properly. There was a sharp inhale on her end, like she had been interrupted in a script she had rehearsed too many times. You are going to ruin this for everyone, she said. Not pleading anymore, accusation. Then David came on the line, his voice strained, breaking slightly. Mom, please, just confirm it. Even if it is temporary, just confirm it so we can stabilize things. I closed my eyes for a moment. David, I said quietly, do you hear what you are asking me to do? He did not answer immediately. I could hear Brittany in the background telling him what to say next, but his voice came back weaker. I just need it to stop falling apart. And that was when I understood something I had been avoiding for years. I had not been part of their decisions. I had been the buffer between their consequences and their comfort. I walked to the kitchen counter and placed my hand on it, grounding myself. I am not the system you fall back on when things get unstable, I said. My voice was steady, almost calm, in a way that surprised even me. There was silence again, but this time, it felt heavier on their side than mine. Brittany finally spoke, slower, controlled but cracking at the edges. If you refuse to fix this, then you are choosing this outcome. I nodded slightly, even though she could not see me. No, I said. I am simply no longer preventing it. The call ended after that. I did not hang up. It just stopped. I stood there for a long time, holding the quiet that followed, noticing something different in it. It was not abandonment. It was space. And in that space, for the first time in years, I realized I was no longer waiting to be pulled back into something that had been draining me quietly all along. Outside, the light had shifted, softer now, almost warm, and I found myself sitting down again, not to fix anything, but to breathe without anticipating the next call, the next demand, the next expectation. It did not feel like resolution yet. It felt like the first moment I was no longer disappearing inside someone else's urgency, and that realization, quiet and unfamiliar, was the beginning of something I did not yet have a name for. The following morning in Naples arrived with a different kind of quiet. It was no longer the heavy silence of waiting for something to break, but the steady silence of something already released. I woke up earlier than usual, around 5:45 a.m., not because I had to, but because my body no longer felt tied to anyone else's schedule. I made coffee, strong and simple, and sat at the kitchen table without checking my phone first. That alone felt like a small rebellion against a life I had not fully realized I was living. When I finally turned my phone on, there were messages, but fewer than before. Not urgency, not panic, just fragments of adjustment. David, Mom, I think things are stabilizing. We will figure something else out. Brittany, we need clarity moving forward. No apologies, no explanations, just distance forming into structure. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked my financial dashboard again. Not out of fear, but observation. Everything was in order, clean, separated, quiet. For the first time, I noticed how much mental space had been occupied by simply maintaining access for other people. Around mid-morning, I drove into town to a small office space overlooking Fifth Avenue South in Naples. It was not large, just a modest workspace I had once considered unnecessary. A leasing agent greeted me warmly. Mrs. Collins, I was not sure you would still be interested in expanding your consulting work. I smiled lightly and said, I think it is time I started using my time differently. There was no announcement, no declaration, just movement. By noon, I had signed papers to reopen my old financial advisory consulting practice on a limited basis, something I had left dormant years ago after my husband passed. The agent looked impressed as she scanned my credentials. You handled corporate accounts for over 30 years? She asked. I nodded. Yes, but I stopped doing it for others for a while. She smiled. Well, the market here would be very interested in someone with your background. Later that afternoon, I met with an old colleague, Rebecca, at a cafe near the marina. She looked at me closely before saying, "You look different, Margaret. Lighter somehow." I took a sip of coffee and replied, "I stopped waiting for people to include me in things I was already capable of doing myself." She laughed softly. "That sounds like a turning point." I did not answer immediately, because I was realizing she was right. My phone buzzed once during the meeting. A message from David. "Mom, Brittany thinks maybe we should reset everything and start over calmly." I read it and placed the phone face down again. Rebecca noticed. "Family issues?" she asked gently. I looked out toward the water and said, "Not issues anymore, just distance." In the days that followed, I began rebuilding quietly. I updated my certifications, reconnected with former clients, and scheduled consultation sessions 2 afternoons a week. I did not tell David or Brittany, not out of secrecy, but because I no longer felt the need to explain my direction before taking it. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in my new office, I received a call from an unfamiliar number, a former client from years ago. "Margaret Collins?" the voice said. "I heard you might be returning to advisory work. If that is true, I would like you to handle my estate planning." I paused for a moment, then said, "Yes, I can do that." After the call ended, I sat back in my chair and looked out at the city street below. People were moving with purpose, cars turning, conversations happening, life continuing without permission slips. For the first time in a long time, I was not reacting to anything. I was choosing, and as the late afternoon sun reflected off the glass buildings in Naples, I realized something quietly powerful was forming. Not a return to who I used to be, but the beginning of something I had never fully allowed myself to become, and somewhere in the distance of that realization, opportunity was already starting to take shape. The morning I signed the final papers at the Naples office, I noticed something I had not felt in years when I looked at myself in the glass door reflection. I was not shrinking into the background of anyone's life. I was standing fully inside my own. The receptionist looked up as I entered and smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Collins. Your meeting with the advisory board is confirmed for 11 a.m. I nodded and adjusted the small name badge clipped to my blazer. It read, "Margaret Collins, Senior Financial Consultant." It felt simple, but it carried a weight I had almost forgotten existed. Inside the conference room, I sat at the head of the table for the first time in a long time. Not as someone assisting, not as someone waiting for permission, but as the one leading the discussion. Across from me, a younger analyst glanced at my portfolio summary and said, "Your restructuring model is extremely precise. You have not worked in active consulting for several years, correct?" I replied calmly. I stepped away, not away from the work, just away from being necessary for everyone else first. There was a short pause, then he nodded with quiet respect. "We would like you to oversee the Naples Estate Advisory Division on a part-time executive basis." I did not react immediately. I simply looked at the contract in front of me, the title printed clearly at the top, Senior Advisory Lead, Coastal Asset Management. When I signed it, the pen felt steady in my hand, not because it was new, but because it finally matched the direction I was already moving in. Later that afternoon, I walked through the office corridor and noticed my reflection again in the polished glass walls. This time, I was not just passing through, I belonged there. A colleague, Rebecca, approached me with a folder. "The client portfolio you handled last week is already outperforming projections," she said. "They want you to present at the regional summit next month." I closed the folder gently and said, "Then I will be ready." It was not excitement that I felt. It was alignment, as if something that had been paused for too long had finally resumed its natural motion. As I left the building, a young assistant held the door open and said, "Congratulations, Miss Collins. The team is really talking about your return." I smiled briefly. "I never left," I said quietly, and kept walking. Driving back through Naples that evening, I passed familiar streets that suddenly felt different, not because they had changed, but because I was no longer viewing them through the lens of waiting. My phone was quiet now in a way that no longer felt like absence, but structure. There were still messages, still names on the screen, but they no longer dictated the shape of my day. At a red light near the marina, I glanced down at my phone and saw a calendar notification for the upcoming advisory presentation. My name, my role, my responsibility, all clearly defined, not by expectation, but by choice. I realized then that my life was no longer organized around reacting to other people's decisions. It was organized around my own. And as the light turned green and I drove forward into the late afternoon sun, I understood that the version of me who once waited for permission was no longer the version steering the course, and for the first time in a very long time, I was not catching up to my life. I was leading it, right here, in the present moment that had quietly become my own. The message arrived on a Thursday morning while I was preparing notes for the Naples advisory presentation. It was not a phone call this time, not an email chain, but a single notification flagged as urgent from the regional financial board office. I remember pausing before opening it, not because I was afraid, but because I had learned that urgency from other people often meant disruption, not truth. When I finally clicked it open, the subject line read, "Attendance adjustment required for regional summit presentation." My name was still listed, but there was a second note attached beneath it, requesting confirmation of external stakeholder involvement related to family-linked financial disclosures. I frowned slightly and set the tablet down on the desk. That was the first time in weeks I felt something unfamiliar, returning, not confusion, but alert awareness. I called Rebecca immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Margaret, I was just about to call you," she said. Her tone was different, careful in a way that made my attention sharpen. "There is something you need to see before the summit." I asked, "What kind of something?" A brief pause followed before she replied, "There are internal questions being circulated regarding your personal financial associations." It came from an external inquiry tied to a family member. I did not respond immediately. I simply stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the Naples skyline. "Which family member?" I asked calmly. Rebecca hesitated again. "Your son, David Collins, and his wife have submitted clarification requests regarding past financial arrangements." The words did not land as shock. They landed as structure shifting. I could hear my own voice from years ago in my head, always assuming things would stay contained within family boundaries. "Has this affected my position?" I asked. Rebecca answered carefully, "Not yet, but the summit committee is requesting a preliminary review meeting before your presentation." I closed my eyes briefly, then said, "Schedule it." That afternoon, I drove to the regional office building overlooking the waterfront. The sky was low and gray, the kind of weather that made everything feel closer than it actually was. Inside the conference room, 3 committee members were already seated when I arrived. One of them, a man I had worked with before, nodded politely but did not smile. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "we need to clarify a few items before proceeding with your executive presentation." I placed my folder on the table and said, "Then ask what you need to ask." A woman on the left side opened a document and read, "There appears to be a claim that you have ongoing financial entanglements with private family transactions that could influence advisory objectivity." I looked at her and replied evenly, "All my accounts are independently verified and fully separated from any external authorization." The man on the right leaned forward slightly. "We received a statement from your son indicating shared financial responsibility in recent family-sponsored obligations." For a moment, the room felt quieter than it should have been. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of water against the marina below. I said slowly, "If my son made that statement, then he is referring to arrangements he assumed, not ones he confirmed with me." The woman exchanged a glance with the others. "We will need written clarification before your presentation proceeds." I nodded once. "You will have it." I gathered my folder and stood, but as I reached the door, the man behind the table added, "Mrs. Collins, just to be clear, this is standard procedure when external parties question financial transparency." I turned slightly and said, "Then you will find clarity in documentation, not assumptions." And I left the room. Outside in the hallway, I stopped walking for the first time that day, not because I was uncertain, but because I was aware that something had moved beyond private conversation. This was no longer contained. It had entered systems I could not ignore. My phone vibrated again. A message from David. "Mom, please call me. This is being misunderstood at a higher level now." I stared at the screen without replying. Then another message appeared. this time from Brittany. We did not expect this to escalate. We just needed temporary confirmation for planning purposes. I lowered the phone slowly. The words did not feel like explanation anymore. They felt like distance turning into exposure. I walked toward the elevator, the sound of my footsteps steady against the polished floor, and as the doors opened, I realized I was not just walking into a meeting anymore. I was walking towards something already in motion, something that was about to reveal far more than anyone had prepared for. And just as the elevator doors began to close, I saw Rebecca rushing down the corridor calling my name, her expression tighter than I had ever seen it before, holding a sealed envelope that she said had just arrived from the review committee, marked immediate and addressed directly to me. The envelope from the review committee felt heavier than paper should feel. I took it from Rebecca's hands in the corridor outside the elevator, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Her voice was low, controlled but urgent. "Margaret, they escalated it directly to the executive review panel. This is not routine anymore." I looked at the seal on the envelope. Official, immediate, directed only to me. "Then I will read it," I said calmly. Rebecca hesitated. "Do you want support in the meeting?" I shook my head once. "No, I want clarity, not interpretation." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on me a second longer than usual, like she was trying to recognize someone she thought she already knew. The executive room on the top floor of the Naples Financial Center was already full when I arrived. The air felt different here, controlled, precise, almost sterile. 3 committee members, 1 legal advisor, and a digital screen displaying my name and profile summary. I placed my folder on the table and sat down without rushing. The lead committee member, a man in his late 50s, adjusted his glasses and said, "Mrs. Collins, we have received documentation that suggests your recent advisory position may overlap with undisclosed family financial influence." I met his eyes directly. "There is no overlap," I said. "There is only incorrect assumption." He slid a printed statement across the table. "This was submitted as part of a formal inquiry." I looked at it. Brittany's name appeared in the declaration line. David's signature was included beneath it, not as accusation, but as confirmation of shared financial context. The room waited. I did not move immediately. I simply read it once more, then placed it down gently. "This document describes an arrangement that does not exist," I said quietly. The legal advisor leaned forward slightly. "Are you denying all involvement in family-supported financial obligations over the past year?" I answered evenly. "I am stating that no such obligations were ever authorized under my advisory capacity or my personal accounts in the way described here." There was a pause. The committee members exchanged brief looks, not of doubt anymore, but recalibration. The lead member finally said, "We also have correspondence indicating your participation was verbally confirmed." At that moment, I opened my own folder and removed a single printed page. "Then let us compare versions," I said. I placed it on the table. It was a full transaction log, time-stamped, clearly separating authorized access, removed permissions, and all active financial controls under my sole name. I continued calmly. Every assumption made about my participation was not based on authorization, it was based on convenience. The room became still. The legal advisor reviewed the document longer this time. Then he looked up. "Mrs. Collins, these records show full revocation of access prior to the disputed event timeline." I nodded. "Correct." A faint shift moved through the room. Not tension, but realization forming slowly. The lead committee member turned slightly. "Then why was your name used in external coordination documents?" I replied, "Because it was expected that I would not object." A silence followed that felt different from all the others. This one had weight. The screen beside us refreshed automatically as additional verification data appeared. My advisory credentials, financial independence record, and separation compliance history were displayed in full. I saw one of the committee members lean back slightly in his chair, his expression changing. Not surprise anymore, but recognition of scale. The lead member finally spoke again, his voice lower. "Mrs. Collins, these filings suggest misrepresentation by third parties, not by you." I responded simply, "I did not correct them because I was not asked to be part of them." The legal advisor closed the folder in front of him. Then, the inquiry does not concern your conduct. For the first time since I entered the room, I felt the environment shift completely. Not toward defense, not toward explanation, but toward separation of responsibility. The lead member stood slightly. We will issue a formal clarification stating your non-involvement. I nodded once. That is appropriate. As I gathered my folder, the screen behind them updated again, automatically flagging the external submissions as invalid due to lack of verified authorization. I noticed it without emotion. But then, as I reached the door, my phone buzzed. A single message from David. No explanation, just 5 words. Mom, they are asking for you. I stopped walking. For the first time, I did not feel pulled backward by it. I simply looked at the message, then forward toward the hallway leading out, where Rebecca was waiting with an expression I had not yet seen from her, one that suggested the next moment was no longer administrative, but personal, and something was about to be revealed that even the committee had not expected to find. The moment I stepped out of the executive review room, I already knew something had shifted beyond paperwork and committees. Rebecca was waiting at the end of the hallway, holding her tablet close to her chest, her expression unusually tense, like she had been holding a breath for far too long. Margaret, she said quietly, you need to see this before you leave the building. I followed her into a small side office, the kind used for private calls, and she turned the screen toward me. It was a public disclosure request that had just been logged into the regional compliance system. My name appeared again, but this time, not in a neutral advisory context. It was attached to a forwarded family statement, one that had already been circulated internally to external stakeholders. Rebecca lowered her voice. This was not supposed to escalate further. It came from your son's legal representative and your daughter-in-law's financial advisor. I looked at the document carefully. There was no accusation now, only narrative shaping, carefully worded implications that suggested dependency, shared authority, and informal financial alignment. Not illegal, but intentionally misleading. I set the tablet down gently. So they are not correcting the assumption, I said quietly. Rebecca hesitated. It looks like they are reinforcing it. That was the first time I felt the situation fully stabilize into something irreversible. Not chaos, structure. I left the building and drove back to Naples without speaking. The ocean road felt longer than usual, not because of distance, but because my thoughts were no longer moving at the same speed as everything around me. When I arrived home, my phone was already waiting on the counter, vibrating repeatedly. I did not need to look at the screen to know what it was. Still, I picked it up. David, I answered. His voice came immediately, strained and uncertain. Mom, the committee reached out to us. They said there are inconsistencies in the statements we submitted. I walked slowly toward the kitchen window. They are not inconsistencies, I said calmly. They are corrections. There was a pause before Brittany came on the line, her tone no longer controlled, but sharpened by pressure. This is getting out of hand. We only documented what was already understood in the family. I turned slightly, looking at the quiet room around me. What was understood by you, I said, was never confirmed by me. David tried to step in. Mom, we're trying to fix this. We did not think it would go this far. I stopped him gently. You did not think it would come back to me, I said. That sentence created a silence I could feel even through the phone. Brittany spoke again, slower now, careful but unsettled. If you withdraw from everything publicly, it will affect how people see us. I nodded, even though she could not see me. Then perhaps how people see things should match how things actually are. David exhaled sharply. Mom, please. We just need alignment. I repeated the word quietly. Alignment. I looked down at the counter, where my own documents were neatly stacked, organized, fully under my control for the first time in a long time. Alignment requires agreement, I said, not assumption. Another silence followed, longer this time. When David finally spoke, his voice had changed slightly. Less defensive, more uncertain. So what happens now? I paused before answering, not because I did not know, but because I was finally choosing not to soften it. Now, I said calmly, you correct what was said without me. The call ended shortly after that. not abruptly, but without resolution. I set the phone down and remained still for a long moment, listening to the quiet in my house, a quiet that no longer felt empty, but deliberate. Later that evening, another message arrived, this time not from David or Brittany, but from the committee office confirming that all external representations would now require direct verification from me before any further reference could be accepted. I read it once, then placed the phone face down. For the first time, the silence that followed did not feel like distance from others. It felt like confirmation of position. And yet, even as the structure around me began to settle into a new order, I knew something was still moving beyond my view, something not yet resolved, waiting just beyond the edge of what had already been exposed. In the days that followed, life did not return to what it was before. It simply stopped bending around other people's expectations. The mornings in Naples felt quieter now, but it was a different kind of quiet, one that no longer carried tension beneath it. I would wake up, make coffee, and sit by the window without reaching for my phone first. Some messages still came through, brief and formal now, mostly routed through advisors and administrative channels rather than personal pleas. I did not respond immediately anymore. I responded when it was necessary, not when it was demanded. At the Naples advisory office, my role had stabilized into something solid and respected. My nameplate sat neatly on the polished desk. Margaret Collins, Senior Advisory Lead. It no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt earned. Rebecca stopped by one afternoon with a small envelope in her hand and a faint smile. The final review notice came through, she said. Everything tied to the previous inquiries has been officially closed. Your position is fully cleared. I took the envelope, opened it briefly, and nodded. Thank you, I said simply. She studied me for a moment before replying, You seem lighter now. I looked out toward the harbor visible through the glass wall. I think I finally stopped carrying things that were never mine to carry, I said. That evening, I drove back home and sat on my porch as the sun lowered over the water. There was no urgency waiting for me anymore, no expectation pulling at my attention every few minutes. My phone stayed inside on the table, untouched. For the first time in years, I listened to the sound of the world without filtering it through responsibility for others. Later, David sent a message. It was simple, almost careful. Mom, things are quiet now. I hope you are okay. I read it once and did not feel the need to explain anything. I only replied, I am at peace. No further conversation followed, and for the first time, that silence did not feel like distance. It felt like acceptance of boundaries that had finally taken shape on both sides. In the weeks that followed, I continued working part-time at the advisory office, not because I needed validation, but because I enjoyed structure that respected my time instead of consuming it. I began taking long morning walks near the marina, noticing small details I used to overlook, the way the light touched the water, the rhythm of boats leaving and returning, the steady movement of life that asked nothing from me. One afternoon, I stopped by a small bench overlooking the bay and realized something quietly profound. I was no longer waiting to be included in someone else's version of belonging. I had built my own space inside the world, and it was enough. If there is anything this journey taught me, it is that silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is clarity. Sometimes it is the moment you finally hear your own voice after years of living inside everyone else's expectations. If you are listening to this, and you recognize pieces of your own life in this story, I want you to know this gently. You are allowed to choose yourself without explanation. You are allowed to protect your peace without guilt. And you are allowed to step away from what diminishes you, even if it once felt like home. Not everything that asks for your loyalty deserves it, and not every silence means you have lost. Sometimes it means you have finally returned to yourself. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 67 years old, and the core truth I want to leave with you is this. Your value was never meant to be negotiated by those who only remember you when they need something. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reached something inside you, leave a comment and share where you are watching from. And if you feel comfortable, tell me what time it is in your part of the world. Your presence here matters more than you know. And if you are walking through your own quiet struggle, you are not alone in it. Not now. Not here. If this story stayed with you, You may also find meaning in the other stories on this channel, each one carrying a different path through loss, realization, and healing. Sometimes the next story is the one that understands you in a way the last one could not, and I will be here when you are ready to continue that journey.